I can only stay about 20 minutes of the meeting. I've got a lunch meeting at 12:30, but I love the shirt.
Thank you. It comes with a whole. I'm not fully decked out in its entirety yet. It comes with a
Was that
tie
a gift?
and matching pants, but this is only if during the day. I have to switch my outfit for this evening at the opening Shabbat of our new campus, so I will not be wearing this jacket for that.
No, I'm guessing not.
You go on to these websites where they have all kinds of sweaters, holiday sweaters and holiday suits, and there are very few options for us Jews. There are, I think, two to three options. Give it another minute or two.
Oh, how kind of you.
Hi, Claudia. Hi, Brad. Just trying to get this group going here.
Thanks, Anne.
And we ran into each other yesterday at UCLA.
Yes, we did. It was nice to see you.
Yes, beyond Zoom in real life.
Just randomly, you were both at UCLA and ran into each other?
Not random. We were attendees at the UCLA Adult Education Luncheon.
Oh, nice.
Did I describe that correctly, Anne?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Hey, Claudia, look at you with your glasses on, looking very hip.
I can't see anything otherwise.
So was that lunch for anyone who participates in the UCLA Adult Learning Program, or? Yeah.
It was a wonderful gathering. It was just huge, actually. There must have been, I don't know, Benjamin, do you think there were like 300 people there?
I was going to say at least 200.
Yeah.
And the entertainers, the choir singing, beautiful. I mean, very entertaining, and some good chow.
Great.
Yeah, it was very good.
That's great. All right.
A great program.
Let's get started. We're actually today going to focus, based on the jacket, on Hanukkah, not so much on Joseph. So I apologize if you were hoping that this was going to mostly focus on Joseph. There's plenty of other opportunities to do that, and his story does not end after this week. So there will be plenty of Joseph continuing in the coming weeks. So we're going to focus on Hanukkah. I will share the doc in a minute, but let us begin with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Praise are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. So with that, I will first attach. Give me 1 second. I will find the source sheet so that if we don't get to everything, you can study it on your own over the course of the Shabbat. And with that, I will share my screen. Okay, so we're going to go through starting on the more basic level and then get into some interpretations of Hanukkah. But before we even do that, what is the story of Hanukkah about? What would you say, according to you, what is the primary message or teaching associated with the holiday? Anyone? It's more than one answer and you can't get it wrong. It's okay. Ben.
Well, I think it's a story of victory, fighting and winning.
Okay, good. Okay, a story of victory, of fighting and winning. What else? Anyone else have any other ideas? Yeah, Anne.
Story about hope and light and letting hope and light in despite awfulness.
Great. Hope and light, letting those in despite awfulness. Gary.
mute, okay. I'd say it's a little bit about protecting ourselves from assimilation, that we want to stay independent as a Jewish people, and that's what the whole fight was about.
Okay, great. So an attempt to maintain our Jewish identity and fight against assimilation. Okay, great. Douglas?
Survival.
Survival. Yes. Okay, these are good. Anyone else want to add to anything? Penina?
Okay, I listened in on a couple of other rabbis that did, and everybody talked about Hanukkah. And they talked about the word makevet, that it's supposed to be a hammer, and that's why they were called Maccabee. But makevet is spelled with a kuf, and the word Maccabee is with a kaf. And the word Maccabee, the way I studied it, was the banner that the Maccabees was holding had on it the sentence, Mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai. And the initials of the word mi, mem, kamocha, kaf, ba'elim, bet, yud, Adonai, is the word Maccabee. So it's not from Makevet form with a kuf. It's the, like I said, the combination of the four words that says, Mi kamocha ba'elim, who is like unto thee among all the gods, the God of our God. So
Okay, great.
was on the banner.
Okay, so based on that, if everyone remembers Mi Chamocha, the prayer that we offer every day about redemption, if that's, I love that teaching, then what is the teaching from that? What is, anyone else want to take it?
That there was assimilation, and they were, the banner was to gather people around the Maccabees, that family of the Hashmonaim, that declared that the God is really the God, the one, and not all the gods that the Greeks introduced to them or worship.
Great. Wonderful. Does someone want to add? No? Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for that, Penina.
And another thing I want to say, that we heard two rabbis already talking about it, and they are talking about the victory, but we also, I don't think anybody mentioned that the Greeks actually were occupied with the rise of the Roman Empire. And that's why the Maccabees, it helped the Maccabees become successful, because they were already getting like poked by the Roman Empire, or threatened by them, engaged in wars with them. So
okay, so from this we see already a variety of different interpretations about what this holiday is really about. So let's get into that and look at some of the various elements of this holiday. And starting off, I mean, some of this is review, and then hopefully we'll see some things that maybe you haven't reviewed as much before. So first, from Second Maccabees, which is again where we find the story of Hanukkah, because as you may recall, we don't find it in the Old Testament or Tanakh at all. It's considered Apocrypha. It's considered one of the books that is not included in what we call the Tanakh, what Christians call the Old Testament. So you have to look to the New Testament or to the Apocrypha to find the story. And there's actually two different versions. There's First Maccabees and Second Maccabees. So this is just one passage from Second Maccabees. So
the book of Maccabees was a part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was included. So it seems like it already existed during the Eassites, this particular group.
It's been around for a long time. It just is not considered a part of what became codified as the Tanakh.
Okay.
So, Judah Maccabee with his men, led by the Eternal, recovered the temple and the city of Jerusalem. He demolished the altars erected by the heathen in the public square and their sacred precincts as well. When they had purified the sanctuary, they constructed another altar. Then, striking fire from flints, they offered a sacrifice for the first time for 2 whole years and restored the incense, the lights, and the showbread. This done, they prostrated themselves and prayed to the Eternal not to let them fall into more such disasters, but should they ever happen to sin, to discipline them, God, with compassion and not hand them over to the blasphemous and barbarous Gentiles. The sanctuary was purified on the 25th of Kislev, the same day of the same month as that on which foreigners had profaned it. The joyful celebration lasted for 8 days. It was like the feast of Sukkot, for they recalled how only a short time before they had kept that feast while they were living like wild animals in the mountains and caves. And so they carried garlanded rods and branches with their fruits, as well as palm fronds, and they chanted hymns to the one who had so triumphantly achieved the purification of God's own temple. A measure was passed by the public assembly, which stated that the entire Jewish nation should celebrate these days every year. Okay, so according to 2nd Maccabees, what is the holiday of Hanukkah about? Or why does it exist?
Like the re-sanctification, reconsecration of the temple?
Yep, that's part of it. And there's a second part. If you there's another holiday that was referenced in that passage.
Oh, Sukkot.
Yes, this is basically a redo of Sukkot, since when they were in the rebellion and there was no temple, they couldn't celebrate Sukkot, because if you remember, Sukkot is one of the 3 pilgrimage holidays, one of the 3 times in the year where Israelites would come together at the temple in Jerusalem and bring sacrifices and offer prayers. And since they couldn't do that because they didn't have access to the temple, Hanukkah really was just another version of Sukkot. And again, it's the same length as Sukkot. So really, according to 2nd Maccabees, the reason we have Hanukkah is really just to commemorate Sukkot, and to honor the fact that that the Israelites weren't able to do that when they were in the rebellion. So
I'm sorry, what day of the year was that? When is Kislev?
Kislev is
25th of Kislev.
Yeah, it's now. It's just that Sukkot, right? So it's imagining that it's a makeup. It's like if you miss the test and you have to do the makeup, right? This is the holiday. They missed the main holiday, and there was no such thing as Hanukkah. It was not prescribed in the Torah at all, right? You don't find Hanukkah in the Torah at all in the 5 books, and therefore they wouldn't be even thinking about Hanukkah. What they were thinking about was Sukkot, because that was the major holiday that had come soon before, and now was the opportunity to celebrate that holiday. Okay, so according to 2nd Maccabees, that is the main reason why we celebrate Hanukkah and why we celebrate it for as long as we do.
The word Hanukkah also means Hanu Bekaf Hey. They camped on the 25th.
Thank you. All right, moving on. So that's part 1. Now we move into the Talmud, written by the rabbis. And according to the Talmud, it says, what is Hanukkah? Our rabbis taught on the 25th of Kislev commences the days of Hanukkah, which are 8, on which a lamentation for the dead and fasting is forbidden. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils within it. And when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed against and defeated them, they made search and found only 1 cruse of oil still containing the seal of the high priest, which contained sufficient oil for 1 day's lighting only. Yet a miracle occurred, and they lit the lamp for 8 days. The following year, these days were appointed a festival with the recital of Hallel and Thanksgiving. Okay, so we have now the more traditional understanding from the version of the story that we hear, at least part of it, that we hear when we are growing up, right? It's the miracle of the oil. That's the story. That's why we have Hanukkah. We have Hanukkah because the oil was only supposed to last for 1 day, and a miracle of God, it lasts for 8 days. Okay, so we already have now a little bit of a different story and a different interpretation, like all things Jewish. We have multiple perspectives offered. Susan? You're muted.
Yeah. So I have a question. That's one phrase from Maccabees. That's Maccabees 2. There's Maccabees 1 and 2, which deal a lot with the fighting
Yes.
that was occurring. So in that case, for it just being Sukkot, which in some respects seems to me a flimsy kind of rationale for it. I get it for the 8 days, but there are no Sukkot there. There's a permanent temple, which is the opposite of the makeshift Sukkot, and it's not agricultural either, which was a Sukkot or living in the tents. So I can understand them appending the Sukkot. Well, we didn't do that to let the tangent, but being that most of Maccabees is discussing their military uh, campaigns, that doesn't seem like a major purpose.
Well, you have to remember they were pretty zealous in their view of religion, right? And so they were pretty dogmatic with their understanding of the text and how to follow that text. So yes, while most of the Maccabees is about the horrific fighting and also about how the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans would forcibly circumcise Jews who were attempting to assimilate, and would martyr themselves and were willing to kill Jews who were not falling in line with their understanding of Judaism. While it is a military victory for them, it was also about how do you hold on to the tradition that we must hold on to, right? If you weren't able to do a mitzvah that is commanded in the Torah, well, let's see if there's a new way for us to do it. So you're right, there is a lot of focus about war and fighting and victory against the oppressor. But this is kind of bringing in the religious components of the Hasmonean dynasty and the Maccabees to kind of, to me, I think it's a nice reminder, not nice, but it's a reminder of their zealous approach to our religion. Penina.
Okay, the Hanukkah was always standing in the temple, and it was supposed to tell the people what day of the week it was. So there was actually 7 days, 7 branches. And they expected the oil to last 1 day because the container was really small. And the whole idea was that it lasted 8 days, and that's why they went for 8 days. Now, it was supposed to be pure olive oil. If the oil stood for a long time, it was a hidden little container that they found. That was the whole thing, that they found a small little container. It settles, and the oil becomes purer, and it lights for a longer time. I brought a pure olive oil to class to my students, and we lit it. And I wanted them to see how long it will take, because there is a difference if you just take it off the thing, of the whatever you just did it, or if it stood there for so long hidden, it how do you call it? The bottom becomes like settled. The top of the oil is pure, and it does burn longer.
Okay.
And that's what they explained as a miracle.
Great. Okay, moving on. Now we have, I wanted to share with you the addition. There are certain times in the year where during the Amidah prayer, and sometimes in the grace after meals or the Bikrat Hamazon, there are sections that are added to the prayers based on the time of year, or based on the holiday. So this is the translation I want you, so this traditionally would be inserted in the morning Amidah during the week, not on Shabbat, for people to recite. We thank you also for the miraculous deeds and for the redemption and for the mighty deeds and the saving acts wrought by you, as well as for the wars which you waged for our ancestors in ancient days at this season. In the days of the Hasmoneans, Mattathias, son of Yochanan, the high priest, and his sons, when the evil Greek kingdom rose up against your people Israel to make them forget your Torah and to turn them away from the ordinances of your will, then you, in your abundant mercy, rose up for them in the time of their trouble, pled their cause, executed judgment, avenged their wrong, and delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and insolent ones into the hands of those occupied with your Torah. For yourself you made a great and holy name in your world, and for your people you achieved a great deliverance and redemption. Your children then entered the sanctuary of your house, cleansed your temple, purified your sanctuary, kindled lights in your holy courts, and appointed these 8 days of Hanukkah in order to give thanks and praises unto your holy name. Okay, so we have a mix of some of the two pieces that we saw above, right? We have the military victory. We have this idea of miracles, And we also have this idea of God's role in this process. And also, I think what stands out to me, of course, is deliver the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few. Kind of a reminder that as Jews, though we are small, we are definitely mighty, right? And the idea that we can overcome the challenges, even though we may be a minority, even though there may be forces out in the world that are attempting to destroy us, we have the capacity with God's help to overcome those challenges, which I think, of course, as we think about what's happening in today's world, this is very appropriate. I saw Ben has his hand up. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Rabbi. I mean, couldn't that be the miracle of Hanukkah, where, as I recall learning in Hebrew school many years ago, the Maccabees were the underdogs. They're fighting this Greek army, professional soldiers, and here this ragtag family soldiers or army, whatever, and they still prevailed with this miracle of God's support. So, in a sense, the underdogs won, so that's the miracle.
Yeah. Yes. Again, the miracle of the underdog overpowering the more forceful powerhouse. Yes. Again, this is to show that there are many different pieces of the Hanukkah narrative, right? And that depending on where we are in history, depending on where we are in our own lives, like all things Torah, we can key in on some of these various elements. And at the same time, we have to almost key in on all of them, right? Is there a way in which we can find the overlap and not only focus on one element of the story of Hanukkah and what Hanukkah represents, but like all things, the complexity of our tradition and recognizing all the various pieces and how they are connected to one another, right? And also how our tradition isn't very straightforward. There's not just one way to understand what this story represents. Which again is really important. Okay, let's move on now to another passage. Now we get in again back to the Talmud, which now starts to offer, these are not as straightforward. These require a little bit more interpretation into what is being stated in the text. So I'll rely on you to offer your interpretations. When Adam, the first human, noticed that the days were getting shorter, he said, "Is the world becoming darker because of my sins? Will it soon return to chaos?" And this is what God meant when God punished me with mortality. Adam prayed and fasted for 8 days. When the period prior to the winter solstice arrived, he saw that the days were now growing longer. Adam realized this is the way of the world. Adam then made 8 days of celebration. They, the Romans, have their holiday at this time to serve idols, but Adam's holiday serves the Holy One. Okay, so what is this about? According to this, what could be one of the reasons or the underlying teachings of Hanukkah? Yeah, David.
Well, you could say that as Adam sees the world renewing itself, Jews see their world renewing itself through this 8-day observation. Wonderful.
Wonderful. I love that. Right? This idea of renewal, rejuvenation, this idea that instead of falling into chaos, these 8 days are a reminder of what we can build up. That in this dark time, it is not a chaotic world. We should not be scared. This is a time of rejuvenation and rebuilding. Wonderful. Any other thoughts on this one? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Because I have some longer passages coming, so I want to make sure we can get to some of those. Our sages taught, the mitzvah of Hanukkah requires only one lamp for a man in his household. The zealous may light a lamp for each and every one in the home. Concerning the zealous among the zealous, Bet Shammai said, the first day one lights 8 lamps, and from then on he continually subtracts one the number. Okay, one at a time. Beit Hillel says, the first day one lights 1 light, and from there on adds 1 light per day. This is the famous argument about how do you light the Hanukkah? Do you start with 8 candles and take 1 away, or do you start with 1 and add 1 each night? Ula said, two Amoraim, rabbinic teachers in the West, the land of Israel, disagreed on how to explain this disagreement between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, namely Rabbi Yossi bar Abin and Rabbi Yossi bar Zavida. Of course, there's an argument, the argument between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and then there's an argument among the rabbis about how they should interpret the argument between Hillel and Shammai. So Jewish. One said, the reason for Beit Shammai was according to the number of days left, and the reason for Beit Hillel was according to the number of days that have passed. And one said the reason for Beit Shammai was according to the number of bulls offered up on Sukkot, and the reason for Beit Hillel was we increase in holiness and we don't decrease. Okay, so again, an argument about the argument. Again, referencing back Sukkot, as we found in the book of Maccabees. So the Talmud recognizes that as a potentially legitimate explanation, even though we don't find it in the Tanakh at all, and you have to go to the Apocrypha. It's clear that they have read that text and had access to it because they're referring to the pilgrimage holidays and the sacrifices associated with Sukkot. And so their argument here is, of course, that argument of how you light the Hanukkah, but that is it about the specifics of Sukkot and it's connecting to that, or is it about this idea, which is what we have come to understand, this idea that we don't decrease in light and in optimism and hope, that every day of Hanukkah and every night of Hanukkah is an opportunity to increase our hope and joy and optimism. So why would we diminish opportunity and hope? And that instead, the reason why we add a candle every single night is to bring more hope and more light into the world. So this is a pretty well-known passage, but I wanted to show just how, again, the various levels of how we argue amongst our tradition, and also hear how it's not just so straightforward, even from the rabbis, specifically about God, and actually has nothing to do with God in that passage at all. It has to do either with Sukkot, or it has to do with this idea of bringing something more into the world, right? That Hanukkah is really about in this dark time. And I know we talk, I think, especially this year, so much about darkness and light, but that it is about increasing, whether it's about, I think now is an opportunity for us to increase our engagement with our Jewish identity and with the world, to increase our connection. That's another really important element that's built into this holiday. Any comments about any of that so far? Penina?
Also, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. That there is no victory without sacrifices, because the Greeks, Syrian Greeks, a combination, they came with elephants, and one of the sons of the Maccabees actually was crushed under the elephant. So with all the happiness and everything, there is always this, that with no effort and no purpose, things really don't just happen.
Yes, thank you. Brad?
You know, Rabbi, maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but do you think this variety of interpretations on the meaning of the holiday strengthens our religion or weakens our religion? Does it cause confusion? Does it lead to a lack of focus? I mean, I think of Yom Kippur, for example, which somehow goes from a day of atonement into morphs into a day of remembrance. And to me, that weakens the message and dilutes the message of the holiday. So I'm wondering if this confusion over Hanukkah has the same kind of effect, or whether you see it as enriching us.
Great question. David has some points. I will add my own interpretations as well, but great question, Brad, as always.
Yeah, great. So just a completely contrary view. I would argue that more complexity, so the more complexity leads to more engagement. The more you have to think about it and get into it, even into the weeds. And therefore, because it forces you to think and engage, it in fact strengthens the religion.
Great. I would agree with David in many ways, Brad, that I think not only is the complexity more in line with the way the world works, and Judaism is very much a religion of realism and of reality. Even though it's a hopeful religion, it's about creating a future that may not be in line with the current reality. It's hopeful in that sense, but at the same time, it's very much grounded in reality. And we live in a complex world, and almost every one of our holidays, maybe to your frustration, has a variety of different interpretations and avenues in. And for me, that's what allows the diversity of Jewish entry, right? That means that you have, depending on where you are in your life, depending on where you live, depending on what historical period you're living in, you have an avenue into the holiday. Whereas a more narrow view of every single holiday would make it much harder for people potentially to come in, and that if you don't necessarily agree with that interpretation or that one teaching, then it's easier potentially for you to back away. Now, I would say at the same time, Brad, the counter argument would be, well, the complexity makes it more complicated and makes it much harder for people to be able to have a clear path forward, and that requires it requires an extra level of engagement that, let's be honest, in today's world is getting harder and harder, because we are living in a soundbite, quick world where if you can't explain something very quickly and very succinctly, people tap out or opt out. And Judaism, it will, I think, to its benefit, continue to fight against that. And that's why probably our numbers continue to be low in general society. But at the same time, why those who stick with it have a real sense of commitment, and also have the ability, as we see, to become leaders in changing the world, because we understand that we live in a complex world and everything is not black and white or dogmatic. So that's my perspective. I want to hear from others as well. So Susan and then Claudia.
So I think these perspectives confirm the kind of adage that two people came to the rabbi with problems with one another. The rabbi said, the first one said, "Oh, you're right." The other one came to the rabbi and he said, "You know what? You're right." And then a third person said, "How can you say they're both right? They're oppositions opposing each other." And he said, "You're right." So I see in these two perspectives very clearly. And I think some of it, in terms of both of them being right, depends when the story is being told. I think for young people, it's important to focus on the triumph as well as the light that's there. And then for people who are more mature, who can handle more complexity, I think you can put in these other things, like it being Sukkot, a thing for Sukkot. So that's my perspective on that. And we're all right?
Yes. Right. And to your point, Susan, if you think about all of our holidays, you take Passover, for example, right? There are the various levels depending on your age and engagement, right? The concept of asking questions during Passover is a layered goal, right? You can ask questions on a very basic level for children and get them to learn how to ask questions. But then as adults, we can make those questions more complicated, more complex, and get into the nuances of the holiday in a way. So we have this layering almost throughout our tradition and throughout our holidays to create as many entry points so that you are correct and you are correct, and we can live with that frustration as well. Claudia.
I really love this idea of entry points that you just explained. It makes a lot of sense. And in a way, it should make it easier for people to approach Judaism, even if, as you say, it's a complex religion that doesn't have fixed dogmas to hold on to. But this particular holiday, because it's in the scheme of Jewish observance, is a minor holiday, right? I think more than any other holidays, leaves us to do with it what we will, according to maybe what we need, or, as you said, who we are explaining it to. But it always felt to me that the interpretation for it kind of changed, every year, according to where we are. And do I love that? I'm not 100% sure. I mean, there's also a story of the infighting among Jews, which is kind of brutal, which we we skim over and leave aside, and we focus on the darkness and light. But yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, if October 7th hadn't happened, based on what was happening in Israel leading up to October 7th, I think this year probably the theme of Hanukkah would have been that infighting, because that was what was happening in Israel up until October 7th, right? So back to your point, as you were saying, Claudia, depending on the year, depending on what's happening, we do have those various entry points. Though I do think that, at least for me personally, there are certain things that resonate year after year, and then I layer on some of the various interpretations of the holiday. But for me personally, this idea of illuminating darkness, of bringing hope into the world, that's something that I try to do throughout the year. But for me, that's a strong, powerful symbol of the holiday itself. So I think there are also ways we can find kind of our own lane for this holiday that may resonate year after year. But again, the complexity allows for multiple avenues. Anyone else want to address Brad's great question? Or Brad, any response or follow-up?
Yeah, I mean, let me play the devil's advocate and say that we tend to say that the reason we're losing our youth is due to assimilation. And I'm wondering if maybe we're losing our youth because we're not sending a clear message as to what we really believe. And if you ask Jews, tell me 10 things that we believe, I think you end up with answers like lox and bagels, because we're incapable somehow of, in the same way that these university professors interviewed yesterday couldn't give a clear answer. So I'm sorry, if I'm going in a different direction and being simplistic, whereas the rest of you are all very into complexity.
I don't. First of all, you shouldn't apologize. And second of all, you make a really good point. And I would say I don't think that's the problem innately inherent to Judaism or Jewish scholarship or Jewish interpretation. I think what the modern world has done in terms of community connection, learning and educational systems have made it harder, because I think we lasted a really long time being able to still teach complexity and have people have a strong Jewish identity. I think what we need to do today is find new modalities of bringing complexity and showing that it's a much longer conversation. I think it has to do with Jewish education, supplemental Jewish education, and the avenues by which people are accessing information, and our need as Jews to be able to diversify the ways in which we teach about our tradition. And to Susan's point, how do we create scaffolding and different layers of learning depending on age, depending on access to Jewish community? That's another piece of this, because I would hate to get rid of the complexity, because what we have done, unfortunately, for the last couple of generations, I would say, is we went so far to the simplification of some of the Jewish ideas that we did a disservice to the young Jews who then came into a more complex world or would get to a college campus and be exposed to a complexity that didn't match up with the type of Jewish education they had, which was potentially a little bit more dogmatic or simplified. And as a result, many adults came to the conclusion that the simplicity of Jewish stories and narratives found in the Torah are not applicable in our lives. which of course is the exact opposite. For all of you who do this every week or regularly know that that's not true. But we created a system in which we tried to simplify it all down so much so that people went out into the world and didn't see how Judaism could actually be relevant to the complex world in which they were living. So I think we need to now swing a little bit more the other way. And it's just not an easy thing to do. But I think, Brad, you bring up a really good point. And that you're keying in on one of the major challenges that we face as a Jewish community walking into this future, especially after October 7th, and especially after what we're seeing and kind of coming to a realization of what has been happening on college campuses. How we're going to respond to that is going to be really important. Anne.
Just to personalize this for a minute, I was raised in countries where Catholicism was predominant and also being a Muslim was, and the teachings were very, very rigid in both of these, in all of these communities. And I think I took, even as a youngster, I think I took pride in the struggle with ideas that happened as a result of being a Jew. And while I do believe in why some people are thinking it's complicated, Brad, I don't think that that is what is making people leave us. I just don't. I think that there are much more complicated reasons that people are leaving religion, but the struggle for complexity and to make complexity palatable is, I think, something that brands us as a religion that is positive. So I guess for me, I enjoy it and I relish it, actually.
Thank you, Anne. Karen.
Thank you, Rabbi. My name is Karen, and this is the first time that I'm joining you, and I want to thank you. I love it so far. So my comment is, going back, I actually agree with Rabbi Shammai. I think that his view makes more sense because we're descending in the number of days, not ascending. But more recently, I agree. It's definitely complicated. And as you were talking, Rabbi, you reminded me of one of my friends whose ancestors were from Hungary. And she said that the government at the time required religious education for everybody. And it was your choice where you went, but they required it. And of course, I would be against the government requiring that here, but it just reminds me of the government thinking that a religious upbringing was important for children. And because the world was more insular, it gave you more of a sense of community.
Yeah, great point. I mean, I think what you're alluding to is the challenge we face in secular society of how do you teach values and morals, and religion can be a very good way of doing that. And especially if we think about Judaism, the way in which we not only help people to intellectually grow, but what so much of our tradition is about a moral growth and ethical underpinning that will guide you and hopefully then guide the world. So how do we make sure that we do that within our community, and how are we raising the next generation of people who both intellectually can understand complexity, but also who can be able to, as Brad you have referred to, could articulate what defines Jewish, what is a Jewish value? What are the values that guide my decision making? Because at the end of the day, even more so than complexity, our tradition, I would suggest, is really about, can you create a foundation of decision making based on a moral code? And the Torah gives us that moral code, but if we aren't educated enough to be able to articulate the code that is guiding us, or if we are misguided, then everything else falls as a result, right? So how do we make sure that we are doing that work as much as we can? Eric.
Well, if you go, what's startling to me and terrifying actually is if you go through the history, the last 2,500 years of history, you see all kinds of groups of quote religions that are, that are invading other places and using military force as a way to expand their religion. It's not the priests that are getting new converts in. It's the soldiers and the penalties of not doing it. That hasn't happened in Judaism, which is in a way startling considering the length of it. And perhaps a good thing is that the Jews are so busy talking about being Jewish that they're not forming an army to force other people to be it. Instead, as a matter of fact, what's always been a characteristic is the self-isolation of Jews in Judaism in these various societies. I mean, they've been living in so many places among Cossacks, among you get my point. But it's not it is a difference, and partly I think the fact that Judaism resembles more a graduate course at a big university than a just let's get together and sing and have something to eat while asking God to make the food good.
Great.
So anyway, thank you. I mean, but this is a very interesting topic, Rabbi, and I'm glad that you brought it up. I don't think it's talked about enough.
Yeah, well, I credit Brad actually for bringing it up, but I credit all of us for continuing to talk about it. And just also to your point, Eric, I think, you talk about how we haven't built up armies. If we remember what happens to the Maccabees and the Hasmonean dynasty is that their zealotry actually leads to their downfall. Yes, they are the ones, we don't usually talk about this as much, but they are the ones who rededicate the temple. We usually end the story there. But 100 years later, they are overthrown because of their zealotry, and then they are wiped off and killed off, right? So that the extremes, our tradition seems to try and reset and works very hard to make sure we don't fall into extremist categories. Now, of course, there are always, like in all religions, there are extremists. We know that they exist. We see them in the settler movement in the West Bank. We see them in Islamic Jihad, right? There are extremists, but our tradition seems to work very hard to create some checks and balances around that. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, Karen.
Oh no, you called out.
Other Karen. There's another Karen. So the other Karen. She's trying to unmute herself.
I'm sorry, I was on. Can you hear?
Yep.
I'm sorry I came in late, but I get the gist a little bit of this conversation. I'd like to compliment you, Joel, because you are fairly new coming in, but I did attend the Kalenu service, and I want to isolate that for a minute and say you have the parents and you have the children. And I think everything is global the way we're speaking in many ways, but it starts with the small and you keep that going. And I also think because of the isolationism that has befallen us these past few years, especially, but it is also the community. And the more you bring the people together in harmony, not necessarily even pushing things down people's throats in religion per se, but it is the belonging that I think is so important, because people feel good when they are together, and they are not necessarily, you're going to get the religion eventually because you know who you are and you're all together and you're forming the same bond. But it really is that community feeling that brings the young together, whether it's the camps, whether it's your meetings. And I frankly wish that there was some continuity. And this is an aside, that we have this wonderful Torah meeting on Fridays. One of the things I loved so much when Steve did this for past times, not recently, we had the continuity of having a rabbi. Now, I know your time is precious, but we want to get to know you. And through these Torah classes, there is another you, in other words, another dimension of you, and that we can speak in a more intimate setting. And we used to meet down, CAA. We had a law office that offered their room it was very large. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but you can ask Steve about it, or even Sam. She'll tell you in a heartbeat. But there's something about being able to talk together in an adult fashion, and we air our views, we speak comfortably with one another, and we're not all right, but right is not the important thing. It's just being able to say, gee, we haven't thought about something, or maybe we could think about something, or is that how you feel? Well, why do you feel? And, all these airy-fairy things come to things. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to have your presence, because it's hard, and we know you're pulled from pillar to post. I respect that. Now all the campuses are pulling you, but and we're losing it in many ways, because we'll never be able to gain great powers in our how many people we're going to join. But at least for those that are Jewish and want to be Jewish, it gives them the avenue to become and be. And that's what we just have to keep pushing for, to be. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Karen. A couple of things I just want as follow-up. I love the idea. I think we do need to think about what does it mean. Right before we started, Anne and Ben talked about how they saw each other in person yesterday at UCLA at something, right? There is something about being in person. It is nice that we can all be on Zoom, but it's something that we can start talking about. What would it be like every once in a while to have an in-person study session like this? So thank you for that. And also, I think in terms of community, as you referred to Kolenu, this idea of isolation, not that we can't just isolate generations from one another, right? There's a really important value of young learning from older and vice versa. And how to make sure that and Jewish community has always been structured in a way that when someone turns 13, they are at the adult table, right? And in today's world, we consider a 13-year-old still, understandably, to be extremely immature and young. And yet our tradition sees a 13-year-old as melding and mixing with people who are 70 and beyond, right? So that we need to make sure, both at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, but in the Jewish world, that we're not isolating generationally, that we make sure that there are these places where people can learn from each other of all ages, because that is something so incredible.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh yeah, Eric, did you want to say something?
Well, I just there's just another thing about Judaism that has fascinated me, which is the extraordinary attention paid to a few 100,000 characters in a certain order that form words in a language that was done a 1,000-year-old language. And each character is examined, cross-examined, and decided on, what exactly it could mean, and then argued about with other members of the community. It's just an extraordinary tradition that, and I could add my theory about the origin of these characters, but this is not the place. But I mean, we know that all alphabetic writing comes from Semitic alphabetic writing created by people in Egypt at a certain time. And so we ask a question: were we the creators of the system that allows transmission of words easily, unlike ideographic things like Chinese, through generations? And perhaps we should get credit, but we don't know where it comes from. Anyway, I'll shut up. But thank you, Rabbi, for us. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm in the hospital right now, so as you may see.
I can tell that looks like a hospital.
I'll be out of it, but they fixed something. Thank you.
Okay, well, refuah shlema, as we say.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Susan.
Yes, and Eric, yes, may you get well. I see this, my granddaughter wouldn't be joining this group. I believe, nor my grandson. And I thank you for having this. If you look around the room, most of us are adults. I mean, my grandchildren are adults, but adults probably at a certain point in life. You have both. You have Kalenu for the whole family. You have and you have these study groups for those who have probably achieved a level of maturity and experience that their comments could resonate with one another. So, I thank you for recognizing some of the diversity, wanting community as well, but having this space, for those of us who might otherwise be left behind.
Yeah, no Jew left behind.
Including Eric, and he can join if you have only. I get it with in person because I used to do Torah study with in person when we did women's Torah study, but this gives me at least, and I imagine others, an amazing opportunity to communicate without having to get in the car and drive and get and then come back. And with the traffic the way it is today, that's a major deal. So I thank you for these this way to learn and communicate.
Yes, you're welcome. And we need to continue, as we talk about complexity, the way it's just gotten more and more complex in terms of the ways in which we need to provide Judaism to the world, right? It can't just be in person, can't just be online. The hybrid model, and we have to continue to be, just as our tradition has done, continue to be creative and innovative with the ways in which we access this tradition. And we're lucky at Wilshire that we have the resources and the team and the mentality to be able to look at that through a variety of lenses. Karen,
just as a quickie, I just wanted to say that at Cedars, what we do for all our meetings is we have them both. And let's just say if you were able to acquire that law firm's large receiving room, we could still have as I so respect what this lovely woman was saying, as we age, it is getting more difficult. So it would not eliminate us as much as join together. Those that could come are there, and and we still perform interactively very smoothly. So I appreciate the point. Sorry to interrupt.
Not a problem. Okay, I want to go thank you for everyone's comments. I want to read this final passage kind of as a conclusion today. It's a little on the longer side, but Arthur Waskow is a great teacher. Hanukkah has been a kind of battlefield between the rabbi and the Maccabee as models of Jewish life. Is there any way to integrate these conflicting orientations to Hanukkah? From the standpoint of the rabbi, Hanukkah celebrated God's saving spirits, not by might, not by power. To the rabbi, this spiritual enlightenment required a kind of inwardness and contemplation that was contradictory to insurgent politics. From the standpoint of the Maccabee, Hanukkah celebrated human courage and doggedness, the human ability to make history bend and change, the need to organize, to act, to fight, to build might and use power, seemed in the aspect of the Maccabee to contradict study, prayer, and contemplation. Can a new generation of Jews help to resolve this contradiction? If our forebears repressed and ignored the sense of Hanukkah as a festival of the darkened moon and darkened sun, what could we contribute by opening up to the aspect of the festival? What could we add by seeing Hanukkah as part of the nature cycles of the year and month? Seen this way, Hanukkah is the moment when light is born from darkness, hope from despair. Both the Maccabean and rabbinic models fall into place. The Maccabean revolt came at the darkest moment of Jewish history, when not only was a foreign king imposing idolatry, but large members of Jews were choosing to obey. The miracle at the temple came at a moment of spiritual darkness, when even military victory had proven useless because the temple could not be rededicated in the absence of the sacred oil. At the moment of utter darkness in Modi'in, Mattathias struck the spark of rebellion and fanned it into a flame. At the moment of utter darkness at the temple, when it would have been rational to wait for more oil to be pressed and consecrated, the Jews ignored all reasonable reasons and lit the little oil they had. The real conflict is not between the rabbi and the Maccabee, between spiritual and political, but between apathy and hope, between a blind surrendering to darkness and an acting to light up new pathways. Sometimes the arena will be an outward action, sometimes an inward meditation, but always the question is whether to recognize the darkness and transcend it. The necessity of recognizing the moment of darkness is what we learn from seeing Hanukkah in its context of the sun and moon. There's no use pretending that the sun is always bright. There's no use pretending that the moon is always full. It is only by recognizing the season of darkness that we know it is time to light the candles, to sow a seed of light that can sprout and spring forth later in the year. Seen this way, Hanukkah can become a time for accepting both the Maccabee and the Rabbi within us, seeing them as different expressions of the need to experience despair and turn toward hope. Seen this way, Hanukkah can become a resource to help us experience our moments of darkness whenever they occur throughout the year and strike new sparks. So I hope this Hanukkah can be a time where you can spark some new sparks personally, sparks of hope. And then, of course, if we think about Israel, if we think about the Jewish people, may this be a Hanukkah where we can bring some light to the darkness that exists. Can we use our power, our strength, our might, our hope, our optimism to try and make the world a better place and make the experience for us as Jews a better place as well. So Shabbat Shalom. Happy Hanukkah to all of you. Thank you for a wonderful conversation and wishing you all the best.
And you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.